Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the realities of the adult film industry.
Yeah, we've got a lot of material firsthand accounts from former performers, interviews.
Exactly. And the goal here is to cut through the noise, give you the key insights fast, get beyond the usual perceptions.
Right. Not about sensationalism, just trying to understand what these sources, these voices are actually telling us. Let's just jump right in.
Okay. So one of the first things that, it kind of surprised me was this discussion from a former male performer about a man-hating vibe he felt.
Mm-hmm. And tied into cancel culture.
Yeah. He talked about these specific cases, right? Female performers accusing male co-stars of assault on Twitter after the shoot was done.
And interestingly, he mentioned that in both those cases, this is just before 2020, there was behind-the-scenes footage.
Right. Footage that apparently showed everything was, fine. Consensual, positive even.
But the striking part, according to him, was that even with that footage, nothing really happened to the women who made the claims.
Yeah, it just got glossed over was the phrase he used. So what does that suggest?
Well, it points towards maybe an environment where challenging certain narratives is really difficult. There's an industry party line, as he put it.
And if you challenge it,
you face pushback. It makes you wonder if we're getting the full story, if people feel pressured to, just shut up.
He even said he got hated for just speaking his mind, sharing his own stuff.
Right, and if that fear is widespread, it definitely makes it harder to get a clear, unbiased picture of what working in the industry is really like.
Okay, so let's shift a bit. Another big theme, this came from several former female performers, was just how short these careers often are.
Yeah, we might know the big names, the ones who stick around for years, but the sources suggest the average is more like, 2 to 4 years?
2 to 4 years, that's not long at all.
It really highlights how the industry model might rely on, a constant stream of new faces, performers as maybe more disposable.
And for that short time, they get this permanent digital footprint.
Exactly. And that carries real weight later on for jobs, dating, even potentially for their kids down the line. It's a massive trade-off.
Plus, there's this vulnerability factor. You hear about women moving to LA or coming from Europe.
Right, leaving their support systems behind. Family, friends, they're often quite isolated.
And maybe a bit naive about how things work, especially with agents.
Yeah, the sense was that agents are often laser-focused on that 2 to 4 year window, maximizing their earnings.
Not necessarily thinking about the performer's long-term future.
Or things like financial literacy. Planning for when the work dries up. One performer mentioned, money going on lingerie, makeup.
Things for the job, essentially.
Right, instead of savings. And that ties into the OnlyFans thing, too.
Oh, yeah, the idea that everyone's making bank on OnlyFans.
The sources painted a very different picture. The average creator making maybe $200 a month.
Wow.
Yeah, the huge earners are really the exception, not the rule. It's a big misconception.
That difference between perception and reality, it's stark.
It really underscores the potential for, misunderstanding the financial side and maybe even exploitation.
Which sadly leads us into another really concerning area, mental health and mortality.
Yeah, the data is limited, but what we found in the sources is pretty disturbing. There was a 2011 study mentioned.
Comparing female performers in California to other women in the state.
And the differences were significant. Higher rates of poor mental health days recently.
7.2 days versus 4.8.
Right, and much higher rates of current depression, 33% versus around 13%.
And the childhood factors were alarming too.
Very much higher rates of reported childhood, forced sex, poverty, being in foster care.
It suggests many might be entering the industry already carrying significant trauma and vulnerability.
And unfortunately, those disparities seem to continue into adulthood. Higher rates of current poverty, domestic violence.
You connect that back to the lack of support networks, the financial instability.
Exactly. It looks like it could be a cycle, potentially making existing issues worse.
And then the mortality stats. Just jarring.
Yeah, that sample from 1990 to 2009. An average life expectancy of just over 37 years.
Compared to 78 for the average American?
Huge difference. Now, we have to be careful that sample included gay performers, so AIDS deaths skewed it somewhat.
Sure.
But even so, the rates of death from drugs, suicide, murder, alcohol abuse, they're incredibly high.
And that male performer also mentioned, anecdotally, 3 straight male performers dying accidentally since 2020.
Yeah, traffic accidents, falls, He had this theory, didn't he?
about a link between willingness to do porn and maybe general carelessness.
It's just anecdotal, of course, but it does make you wonder about, risk-taking profiles or something like that. Needs more looking into, really.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. There was also this idea brought up about arousal being a kind of hypnotic state.
Yeah, the theory being that when you're highly aroused, you're more suggestible.
So watching pornography could potentially, program your subconscious.
That's the idea. Associating what you see on screen with your own arousal response.
He linked it specifically to things like cuckoldry fantasies, suggesting that watching others could actually create that arousal pattern.
It's definitely a thought-provoking concept about how consuming this media might shape desires over time. Though, proving it definitively is tricky.
Sure. Okay, moving to something much more public. The whole Pornhub controversy, the trafficking hub campaign.
Right. Started by Liam Webb back in early 2020, and it really blew the lid off Pornhub profiting from, horrific stuff. User-uploaded abuse material.
Including child sexual abuse material, CSAM.
Yes, and making money from it through ads. The scale was shocking. Over 100 confirmed cases of child abuse and trafficking found on the site since 2020.
And the consequences were huge. Lawsuits from hundreds of victims.
Criminal charges from the U.S. government, a big fine for profiting from sex trafficking.
And then the payment processors pulled out, right? Visa, MasterCard.
Discover, PayPal too. All cut ties in 2020. That was massive.
Which led to Pornhub taking down, 91% of its content?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't verify age and consent. Went from 56 million videos and images down to just over 5 million.
That's an incredible drop. And they lost mainstream advertisers too.
It really shows the massive problem they had with moderation and just how much unverified, potentially illegal content was up there.
And the experiences shared by former performers really drive that home too. The feeling of discomfort, exploitation.
Yeah, one woman talked about her first shoot feeling uneasy and immediately being labeled difficult.
Right, expressing boundaries was a problem.
And that other story, refusing a shoot and having her phone and shoes taken, left stranded, that's terrifying. Shows a total lack of control.
Initial filming often sounded overwhelming. Big crews, pressure, being offered Viagra right away.
Yeah, like being thrown into the deep end with no support. And the emotional toll.
Hating the work, suicidal thoughts, using drugs or alcohol to cope. It came up again and again.
And hearing about witnessing things like a co-star having a seizure during a rough scene.
Or the performer who described being bound, gagged, essentially feeling raped in a scene and then attempting suicide.
It just highlights this huge disconnect, doesn't it? Between what viewers might assume and the performer's actual lived reality.
Which brings us back to the company often at the center of it all. MindGeek, now rebranded as ILO.
Right, the big porn monopoly. The rebrand definitely seems like an attempt to shake off that negative MindGeek reputation.
And how they built that empire. A huge loan, 125 secret investors.
Yeah, including some big names like JP Morgan Chase, Cornell University apparently. They own so much.
Playboy, Brazzers, Reality Kings, Wicked Pictures, and all those tube sites, Pornhub, RedTube.
The scale's immense, and finding out the majority shareholder was Bernd Bergmair, the guy who used to own RedTube.
It pulls back the curtain a bit on who's actually running the show. Based in Canada, but offices everywhere.
And the money involved. Hundreds of millions in revenue annually, company valued in the billions. Pornhub is the cash cow, driving traffic to their paid sites.
Their model seemed to depend on just having masses of content, right, for Google results.
Exactly. Unrestricted content seemed key, which clearly led to issues with verification and safety.
That massive takedown in 2020, wiping out millions of videos, it showed how much unverified stuff was there. They seemed worried about the credit card companies pulling out.
And the moderation process itself sounded deeply flawed, like 30 moderators for millions of videos.
Watching with the sound off, basically guessing if someone was underage.
It's described as an underage guessing game. And the trauma for the moderators themselves, some of whom had histories of abuse. It's awful.
Then the former owner, Fabian Thielman, exposing the shareholder, suggesting people target the credit card companies. Maybe wanting to buy the company back cheaper, who knows?
It's complex. But even with the CEO and COO resigning, the fact that the CFO and CPO are still there, running Pornhub under this new Ethical Capital Partners name.
Which is run by a criminal defense attorney, Solomon Friedman.
Right. It makes you pretty skeptical about how ethical the changes really are when key figures from the previous regime are still in charge, and there aren't clear new preventative policies.
Lana Rhoades' experiences seem to echo a lot of this. Her agent being controlling.
Prioritizing producers, calling performers disposable.
Yeah, and that difficult label again for expressing discomfort. Having no say in shoots, refusing one and being left without her phone or shoes.
Just like the other account. And her first film being overwhelming, pressure to do acts she didn't want to. Being told, good sluts do anal for $400.
Horrible. And the agent controlling her living situation, even making her share a bed with another performer, forbidding dating.
It sounds incredibly controlling, almost pimp-like, as she described it, using grooming tactics. And she felt she couldn't speak up because she wanted to succeed.
That power imbalance is just so clear.
Absolutely. And Mia Khalifa's story adds another really important layer of coercion, regret, finding her voice.
Starting so young, encouraged by her husband at 18, signing that in perpetuity contract.
Which means they own the rights forever. And the anxiety when the company went after her publicly. Intense.
She described deep isolation, not leaving bed, not taking care of herself.
But also that realization, I am not the sum of the things I've been through. That's powerful.
She talked a lot about her background, right? Identity struggles, internalized racism, being a people pleaser.
Yeah, feeling it made her vulnerable. And that abusive relationship she was in before, eloping young, lacking self-awareness, easily manipulated.
Therapy seems to have been crucial for her. Understanding her past, her triggers, forgiving herself.
Definitely. She talked about constantly asking, what is wrong with me? While in the industry, linking it to low self-esteem, lack of boundaries, therapy was hard, but transformative.
And even after leaving, that feeling of isolation persisted for a while.
Though still better than being in the industry, she said. Moving to Austin, finding therapy, new friends that seemed like a real turning point.
But still facing recognition in normal jobs, feeling uncomfortable. The past just follows you.
And the anxiety spiked again in 2019-2020 when the company kept attacking her. Her view is pretty clear. Major porn production companies are predatory, abusive, and unethical.
She even worries that some well-meaning performers might unintentionally use grooming rhetoric.
Right. And she advocates for real change, raising the contract age to 21, getting rid of those in perpetuity clauses.
She felt regret almost immediately when her work went public, that feeling of being a burden in jobs later.
Trying to rebuild as Sarah and finding it impossible. So she leaned into the fame, reclaimed the name Mia, used social media.
Especially TikTok, finding a supportive female audience, finding her voice there.
But still has anxieties, especially about AI and deepfakes potentially recreating those violations.
She's open about medication for anxiety, depression, and moving into TV, finding recognition on her own terms now.
Yeah, shifting from shame about the past to pride in who she is now. It took time, community, medication. It's a journey.
Her message to her younger self, you're amazing, you're enough, you're perfect, really speaks volumes about overcoming those insecurities.
And she sees addressing fetishization through conscious consumption, not supporting exploitative companies.
Her advice for young people moving countries, embrace your identity. For starting therapy, don't tell judgmental people. Practical stuff.
She worries about AI marginalizing real sex workers. And while she's critical of the industry, she sees a difference between supporting individual workers ethically and encouraging entry into the industry itself.
She also flags the issue of kids accessing porn, the need for parental controls, and distinguishes destigmatizing sex work from promoting it as a career.
Believes male performers have advantages, sees parallels with predatory contracts in music. Those in perpetuity clauses for someone's body are just deeply unethical.
She felt pressured herself, feared professional consequences for saying no.
And she hopes for more female-centered, ethical production companies. Acknowledges social media can be harmful, but also build community.
Her advice on confidence, fake it till you fucking make it, and the importance and difficulty of setting boundaries.
Yeah, and just the general lack of a societal understanding for people in the industry.
Yeah.
Plus, concerns about normalized porn impacting young people's views on sex.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot. This deep dive, I mean, it really pulls back the curtain, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The complexity, the frankly, often dark realities described by these former performers, it's a world away from common perceptions.
Yeah, the personal struggles, the systemic problems. It's clear it's an industry with significant risks and potential for harm, with consequences that last.
So we hope this look has given you, the listener, a lot to think about. Maybe about your own consumption habits, the bigger picture.
And it leaves us with some questions, right? Considering all this, what responsibility do we have as individuals, as a society, to address these ethical concerns?
What other questions does this raise for you about the media you consume and the actual human beings involved in making it? Definitely something to keep mulling over.